Welcome to Restoration Beyond the Couch, where host Dr. Lee Long and guest host Lila Pond dive into real conversations that impact your mental health. In today's episode, Rested Minds, the podcast for better sleep and stronger mental health, we're exploring the essential connection between quality sleep and mental well-being. Together, Dr. Lee and Lila will uncover practical insights, science-backed tips, and the latest research to help you reclaim your rest and renew your mind. If sleepless nights have you feeling drained, you won't want to miss this episode. Your journey to mental wellness starts here. Let's get started.
Welcome, listeners, to this very special episode of Restoration Beyond the Couch. I'm Lila Pond, an LPC supervisor here at Restoration and the illustrious sister of Dr. Lee Long, whom I consider a great expert. I'm going to be guiding him through this conversation where we're going to explore the critical role of sleep in not only our mental health journey, but our overall health journey. So, in the host seat for this episode, we have, as I've said, Dr. Lee Long. He's an expert in many things, but especially in mental health, trauma recovery, and mindfulness. And Lee, you're here to share those insights on how sleep impacts our emotional and psychological well-being. It's so great to have you in this different role today.
It is so great to be here with you and talking about sleep, which is so important. Dr. Grossman, who was a sleep expert, said that the how does he say it? The bridge between hope and despair is a good night's sleep. And
is it ever?
I think that is something that we often overlook, is the role and the critical role and importance of sleep. And I think that, for a long time, I thought, I had the mindset, well, you sleep when you're dead.
I've said that a few times in my life, especially with a newborn baby.
Right.
Or a teenager.
Right. It's a lot like a newborn baby.
Right.
But when I realized what sleep does for our brain, boy, I retracted that. I retracted that statement, and especially having a parent who struggled with Alzheimer's. That's one of the things that it has really set me on a path of how do I prevent it, and if I ever get it, is there anything we can do to slow it, to stop it, or to reverse it? And right now in medicine, they would say that there's only room to slow it. I think there's new research showing that sleep can somewhat slow it, but can also somewhat turn it around. And that's where I was like, okay, you have my attention, and now sleep is something that I think is super important.
Well, and that is such a huge topic today, is what is the formula for health longevity, if you will, to coin a phrase from some other professionals. But it is, first we may need to understand, and our listeners will probably benefit from understanding what happens when we sleep and why does that create such an essential part of our vital health.
I love that. I think you're right. I think you're right that healthgevity, I like that. Because I think that we're looking for longevity, but we are not looking to live longer. We're looking to live more productively.
Exactly.
And I think that, when you think about, so what happens when we sleep? Well, there's several different stages of sleep. There's stage 1, and that's light sleep. That's when your body is just kind of drifting down into sleep, and you're, as I see it, we're getting prepared to go into the other 2 phases of sleep, which the second phase would be deep sleep, and sometimes people refer to the first 2 phases as light sleep. Then they refer to the phases 3 and 4 as deep sleep. And when I learned what happens in deep sleep, I think I may have called, I know I called you to tell you, but
Yes.
I think I may have called like 4 or 5 people to say, oh my gosh, do you know what happens when you fall into a deep sleep? So what gets me so excited is that we have, from the neck down, we have a lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system, as I'm sure people are mostly aware, is where you have lymph nodes that your body moves fluids through, and your lymph nodes clean it, and it's sort of like your filter system. But we don't have lymph nodes in our brain. Our skull prevents that. There's no room.
Does that mean we have big brains?
Yes, some of us do. Yes. So how does our body clean our brain? Well, for a long time they thought it didn't. But when we get into that deep sleep, our glial cells shrink, and cerebrospinal fluid comes in and washes our brain. It washes it of amyloid beta plaque, which is that which they say is connected to Alzheimer's, and tau protein, which they say is connected to other neurological issues. And the brain washes itself of those plaques and that protein. And when I heard that, I just thought, whoa, we are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yes, that's incredible.
That as soon as we move into the REM sleep, our brain comes back to the normal size and it stops washing. And in REM sleep, I've heard it described as like when you're going through something that's tough, difficult, some people might even call it traumatic, that the brain sorts through that through dreams. REM sleep is where we dream. And how many times there have been several studies done where they will give people a problem to work through, and then they will put them into REM sleep. And when they come out of REM sleep, oftentimes they will have a solution for that problem. What I find in that is that it's often been described this way, that it's like whatever you're going through is like a citrus fruit, like let's call it an orange. And that when we have REM sleep, when we dream, that it's like the brain's way of pulling that rind, that external rind off, or the skin off the orange. Yeah. And so that what's inside is much more malleable and workable. And so when you think about, that when we go into deep sleep, that our brain is cleaning itself. And when you go into REM, your brain is processing themes and things, and it's helping sort of take that hard cover off of hurtful, hard things, or you're processing through different ideas and formulations and learning. The other part of what REM sleep also offers is that if we have, like, say, 5 neural pathways that we're using, or we have 5 neural pathways for something, and we really are only repetitively using 3, REM sleep might be where the brain says, okay, we don't need that anymore, and it becomes more efficient. And so you think about all that goes on during sleep. We're cleaning our brain, we're becoming more adaptable, we're becoming more efficient. I mean, when I learned all of this, I was like, well, it is time to go to bed right now.
Exactly. And that is so fascinating. It's like the lymphatic system's working from the neck down, and then the Roomba goes upstairs.
That's it.
Right? And
That's
just
it.
starts washing all that away, the night cleanup team.
That's right.
But, there are theorists who are very focused on the meaning of dreams and what that means. So, and we aren't necessarily going to go into that today.
Mm-hmm.
However, it is fascinating if you would kind of deep dive a little more in how this impacts our emotions and our mental health. I can see where it would help our physical health, and our brain is like waking up stronger and more primed for adaptation or new ideas. But how does this impact our emotional and mental health in the long run, especially?
Yeah. I think the best way that I could articulate that would be that when you think about being well rested, right? You think about you're not operating with as much despair, right? If you again,
it's the bridge.
Right? The bridge between hope and despair is a good night's sleep. Grossman was really onto something there.
He was, and it's so funny because my late husband and your late brother-in-law used to say that all the time. You know, when you're raising 6 teenage daughters and 2 teenage sons, and they didn't come here in that form, but but
newborns feel like teenagers often
with car keys,
right?
And teenagers feel like newborns, but it's that is the place where you do find deposits of hope. So that is spot on. Yeah, it gives us, I think, a platform. And I think that when you think about, I remember a friend of mine who her sister was a dressmaker. Okay.
She would say that her sister would be so distraught over a dress that she was producing for some big event for someone, and she felt so responsible, and that she would go to sleep. She would say her prayers. She would ask God to highlight things for her. She would go to sleep. And she said it was like a divine visit. And I think that our brain really does work through some of our despair, some of the pains. And you think about the premise of like ART, accelerated resolution therapy, which we have just become trained in. And
right.
Gosh, I love ART.
Oh, it's so powerful.
And EMDR. They operate off of that eye movement that replicates REM sleep. And you think about, well, then doesn't REM sleep have such a great, it has something so beautiful and powerful to offer us? Yes. But here's part of the struggle where ART and EMDR come in. Is typically when you have any kind of post-traumatic stress or you're stressed about something, what tends to get disrupted?
Sleep.
Exactly. And so we have learned these theories and these therapies of how we can, I hate to say artificially impact, but I think that's appropriate, that we can artificially impact our brains by replicating a piece of that REM sleep. And so when you think about when sleep isn't disrupted, and if we're protective of sleep, then how powerful could that be for us?
Right. Yeah. And look, anything in life that can help us deal with the things that come along that are difficult, but also even the joys of life can keep us awake sometimes. Right. But what are some common factors that can interrupt sleep? You mentioned one, troubling stress, anxiety.
You know, one common factor I think that's really simplistic is we don't turn all the lights off in the room.
Okay.
It's a well-lit room. In other words, in order to sleep, we have a cold, dark space.
Okay.
And so temperature, light, artificial light. I know that a lot of our smart, not so smart, devices put off ambient light.
Right.
And, going into the evening, it's interesting because my wife, your sister-in-law, loves her sleep. She's a woman who loves her sleep. And
she's obviously extremely smart.
She's brilliant.
Right.
And one of the things that she naturally does is when the sun starts to go down, she starts lowering lights in the house so that there's not a lot of artificial light coming into our eyes. Because if you'll notice, if you wake up and you go, let's say you wake up in the middle of the night and you go to the restroom, if you do that in the dark, you doesn't wake you up as much.
Right.
But if you turn on your phone or turn on the light or you do something that lights up the room, you're immediately then you're waking yourself up further. And so her whole thought is, and she's actually right about this, is that when the sun goes down, start turning down the lights. I know some neuroscientists who are I think, they're so guarded of their sleep, which I understand why. They will put red filters over their lights, and that they will turn on the red filters at night, so that all of the light that's coming to them is red filtered light, which does not wake the brain up as much.
Okay. That is fascinating, because light is often sometimes what we seek if we're not fans of darkness.
Yes.
There are some folks who don't like to sleep with it too dark, but I think there's a way to tone that light down.
Yes.
And that's so helpful.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is temperature is important.
Yes.
Maybe avoiding too much light.
Right.
What is something else a couple of other things that might be helpful?
So this may sound counterintuitive, but if you're struggling with sleep, waking up with the sun,
Okay.
and going outside with the sunrise and taking in. Now, do not stare at the sun. I am not suggesting that you stare at the sun, but looking at the clouds, looking at the blues and the reds and the oranges and all of that, like taking all of that in. In other words, don't wake up and put sunglasses on. Depending on what type of glasses you wear, it won't filter out that stuff. But if it's best to just have the naked eye ingesting that, and yes, ingesting that, because there's only two nerves, your optical nerves, so your eyes, and your olfactory nerves, so your smell or your nose. Those are the only two nerves that go directly into your brain. The rest goes through your brainstem. And so when you ingest that morning light, it starts the production of melatonin. You think, well, wait, I thought melatonin was for sleep. Yes, but it begins in that morning rhythm. And so wake up with the sun, and conversely, go to bed with the sun. You may think, well, golly, I can't go to bed that early. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But maybe you can't, and don't push yourself, and don't shame. For the love of all things pure and holy, do not shame yourself for that.
Yeah, that'd
There's
be a negative.
reason. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
But when the sun goes down, go outside, take a walk around the block. Again, ingest that sunset. Again, don't stare at the sun, but do look at the sunset and take that in, because it helps put your body on a good rhythm, that it understands, okay, it's now nighttime. And when you go back in, just keep your lights a little more dim, or put the red filter on them.
Right. That's great. And that is a great reminder too, that goes all the way back to why we're even talking about the importance of sleep, is that our mind and our body are so connected and so vital in taking care of those things, that we've got to remember that all of those factors are sending a signal to our body to do what it was designed to do. And we're moving out of the way those interrupting factors, hopefully. It's just for overnight. And how are we going to get across that bridge of despair to hope if we don't start kind of moving those things out of the way?
Well, and one sleep scientist who's a friend of mine said that what sparked his interest in grad school was the fact that we spend a third of our life asleep.
So true.
So
say more about that.
We spend a third of our life asleep, so why wouldn't it be an important theme?
Absolutely.
And when he looked into that, or when that's what sparked him, and I started thinking about it from that perspective, and he and I started talking about all these themes that go into sleep and what all happens in your brain and all that, and again, we spend a third of our life asleep, so it has to be something that we pay close attention to.
And prioritize.
Right.
Some of us have bought into the the mythical thinking that I only need 3 or 4 hours of sleep and I'll be fine. And that's kind of like saying I only need to eat one certain thing, or I only need to not eat so many times, and believing that kind of mythical thinking, but we're not listening to our body. So this is super important. So do you have some specific tips for sleep? I know you've mentioned the red light, I know you've mentioned the sun, But what about that old nasty stress and adverse event thing or relational interruptions? What do we do with that?
That's such a great question. I think that first and foremost, I know a lot of people, well, not a lot. I know people wear sleep trackers. I wear one. My watch tracks my sleep. And so I'm looking at on a daily basis, how much time did I sleep? How much REM did I get in my sleep? And it's a gross estimate, but it is, but it's watching my heart rate to determine about where I am with things. It tells me deep sleep, REM sleep, light sleep, how often did I wake up in the night based on my movement. And I know that I love data and I can totally geek out on data, but I also know that I cannot be distracted by the data. That if I know that, I was just with one of my kids for the weekend at an event for her school, and I was super excited, and I started thinking at a certain time, I'm like, wow, I'm really sleepy, but I thought, I don't want to give this time up, and who cares if I only get 5 hours of sleep tonight? Right. And so we want to be careful that we don't become rigid with our bridge from despair to hope.
That's great. Yes.
But that it's more of a it's a principle that we're guarding sleep, but we're not coveting sleep.
Right.
And if we're anxious, it's okay to be anxious. We don't need to become anxious then about our anxiety, because then we're going to have sleep anxiety.
Right.
And so if you find yourself feeling anxious about sleep, and am I getting enough? Is it the right kind? And all, I would encourage you to, just as much as you can, radically accept the fact that you're going to do the best you can with what's in front of you, and maybe you need to get up out of bed and you need to just reset.
Okay.
And then you can try to go back into bed and with a mindset of, hey, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to get the sleep that I can get, and I'm going to move through this in a way that is not trying to force something.
That is so important. I'm glad you brought that up, because rigidity takes us often down. It'd be like driving without GPS and continuing around the same square block that you, or detour or whatever. We just don't get where we want to go.
That's right.
And so I think by being less rigid and more open and flexible, but intentional at the same time.
That's well said.
Then we find that sleep becomes less of a nemesis, and more of a partner.
Yeah, I love that.
I mean, I think too, if we can find a place to park some of our cares.
Yes.
With this accelerated resolution therapy, part of the mantra is we're not doing away with the facts. We're just creating new images and sensations in our body. And so what's wrong with kind of right before going to sleep reminding ourselves that we can envision, remember the old count the sheep jumping over the fence or whatever? I mean, that would stress me out. What if that sheep falls? What's chasing them? We don't want to have images that create anxiety for us, but we do want to, just find ourselves in a pleasant place, not an anticipatory, oh no, I know I'm going to wake up at 3:00, right? Do you find that having narrative narrative management?
I like that. That's actually brilliant, because it's setting your mind on these. Well, let me come at it a different way. When I'm laying my head down to go to sleep, if I'm not already asleep by the time my head hits the pillow, then what I'm doing is going through the positive things in my day. That's my time of gratitude. What am I thankful for? What am I grateful for? And it's a time of meditation and prayer for me. Of, you know what, God, thank you for this day, and thank you for this thing, thank you for that thing, thank you for this person, and thank you for this dynamic. And it really, it's like, wow, I have a really great life, and now I'm asleep, you know.
Right.
And it really, I think that can be a really neat exercise to not only put us in gratitude, but also to stave away some of those worries. Because even when I have something the next day that I'm stressed by or worried about, one of the exercises I do is trying to be grateful for the things I can be grateful about in that stressful thing.
Oh, that is so powerful. And you know, this, and I can't name the exact study, but there was a study done on gratitude and functional MRI research at the same time. And what was discovered was that neural pathways, they called it a cognitive expander.
Yes.
So in other words, it's like taking an expander and dropping it into that neural pathway and widening it. It doesn't mean you'll always think differently. It just means you have more room to think differently. And that's where, you know, there are a lot of things that happen during the day that maybe we're not grateful for. And we could
Right.
spin out thinking on that, right?
Right.
But then that's driving the bus.
It is. And I also want to say some of those things that we may not be grateful for may legitimately not be things that hold gratitude. I
Well,
didn't
no
say
kidding.
That well. But
Right.
in other words, I don't want to, and I know you're not saying this,
Right.
I don't want our listeners to think what we're saying is that we have to put a Pollyanna Band-Aid over things.
no.
And I know you're not saying that.
Right.
It's that place of there are some things in life that are just really difficult. And we have to just see it, name it, and say, yep, that's difficult, or that was traumatic, or that was painful.
You know, and that reminds me, and this is kind of what I think we're saying, and I'm kind of excited about this. I certainly wouldn't want to eat a heavy meal while I'm working out really hard.
That's right.
Or running a marathon. That would prevent my body from doing what I'm asking it to do.
That's right.
So I'm asking my body to go to sleep. So I want to make sure I'm giving it every opportunity to do so by not doing something else.
That's it.
And that is ruminating on everything that went wrong that day.
That's it. And it's funny, a very good friend of mine was telling me, he said, I don't know that I dream. And I said, oh, I bet you do. You just don't recall them. And he was like, okay, then how do I recall my dreams? And I said, well, you would start by, basically alerting your body to the awareness that you want to recall your dreams. And I said, when you find yourself rising out of sleep, make a mental note to scan, did I dream anything? Well, I saw him today, and I ran into him, and he said, I do dream. I remembered my dream.
That's awesome.
And we went through that, like he went through this dream. And I said, well, what sense do you make of that? And he talked through some things that, he thought that it could be. And what's interesting is he illuminated the fact that he was working through some emotions.
Okay.
And I to your point, I don't want to eat a heavy meal right before I work or while I'm working out. That is brilliant. I love that analogy because you're spot on. And you think about, what are you doing when you work out, right? You're lifting heavy things. You're running fast, running far.
Yes.
Running, hard, or however you want to say it. Well, what does dreaming do for us? It sorts out those things that we don't, in our conscious awareness, we don't have that space for, right? So our brain our body is, we have sleep paralysis, right? The only two things that it doesn't paralyze is our eye movement and our diaphragm.
Oh, really?
The rest of our body is paralyzed.
Oh, my goodness.
And so you can, your eyes move during sleep and you still breathe. The rest of your body is down. Otherwise, we would be acting out our dreams.
And your heart's beating.
Yes, well, right.
I'm just
right.
teasing.
Yes.
That's a given.
Yes. There are sleep disorders that I want to just touch on, that sometimes your body doesn't go into sleep paralysis, that you may have night terrors or sleepwalking, and there are those aspects. And if that is something that a person struggles with, I hope that they will see a sleep specialist to help them sort that out.
Or sleep apnea.
Right.
Right.
Oh gosh, sleep apnea. That is so critical. That can lead to premature death. I mean, you stop breathing.
Right.
And, some people think, well, yeah, that's just going to happen and I'm not going to do that. But if you can breathe when you're awake, then you need to be able to breathe when you're asleep.
Most definitely.
And I just can't caution enough, if you have sleep apnea or if you snore,
Right.
there are CPAP and BiPAP machines. Now, a lot of sleep scientists don't love the CPAP and BiPAP machines because that positive airflow into your nasal passage, they believe can be very disruptive to the sleep process, and you may not get into that deep sleep. It may prevent you from hitting the different
levels,
cycles of sleep.
Yeah.
However, there's mouthpieces, there's head placements, there's ways to adjust yourself. If you believe that you or your partner has a sleep disorder like sleep apnea, that is something that I strongly encourage you to seek, like do a sleep study, do some, the studies that are being done with, especially with pregnant women who have sleep apnea, the impact on the baby is really significant. And they're sussing that out now in studies current, that if you can help a pregnant mom sleep better, and that it does have an impact on the unborn child.
Oh, that's because oxygenation is so important. I think that's why pregnant women are encouraged not to allow their heart rate to get past a certain level when they're working out or whatever, just so that there's good blood flow and oxygen's not restricted in any way. So that is super helpful.
Right.
Well, I know there are other sleep disorders. There's apnea. There's maybe
night
some
terrors.
More night terrors. Maybe there are others that you, I mean, would you consider insomnia? Or is that just a misused term?
No, I think that you're right. Insomnia due to stress or insomnia due to some other cause that doesn't allow a person to, their body just doesn't shut down. They stay in that heightened sympathetic state.
There you go.
Whereas, sympathetic is they call it the fight or flight. There's other parts to the sympathetic system, but there's also the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest. But what's interesting is that there's a balance to both, right? You can overdo the sympathetic where you're in that fight or flight, and you can overdo parasympathetic where it actually, overdoing parasympathetic leads you to coma and death. And so it's all a balance, right? And so you want to help the body get down into that resting space where, again, you can do breathing exercises. You can do the box breathing.
Oh yes.
3 square, 4 square. Some people do 5 square breathing. I know that some people do the inhale where it's where they take that inhale and then they take that last big breath in, and that's helpful for calming the body, getting into that, moving more towards that parasympathetic system.
So kind of going back to that word insomnia, what I'm hearing you say, and I may be totally off on this, so please correct this, but it's almost like that is a spectrum for people who have trouble sleeping, and if you just hold on to that maybe you miss what's underlying. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think that's a neat way to say that.
Okay, so like perhaps highly anxious or someone struggling with depression, that may be underlying what's creating the insomnia, the state of insomnia.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a neat way to say that.
Okay. So not to just hang the moniker of insomnia.
Right.
Oh, well, I just have
It's
insomnia.
why. Right.
Okay. So it's work through some of these tips and healthy ways.
Yeah.
Of,
There's CBT, which
it has its place.
Yeah, it has
right?
its place. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, insomnia.
Okay.
There's a lot of tips and tricks that they utilize there of, like you're saying, like thinking more positive things, before you're like that space of gratitude. I don't know that that's all CBT, but there are themes like that in cognitive behavioral therapy. There is another theory that talks about, that works through how to help people through their painful dreams, like having nightmares.
Okay.
And what's super interesting is it's a lot like our ART stuff, that accelerated resolution therapy is when you have a repetitive nightmare that's very thematic, that the therapist will work with you to create an alternate ending.
There you go.
And that alternate ending, you can say that, like one example is if you're being chased through a small town where you get trapped by a man who you believe is coming to do harm. Well, you change the ending to say, no, he was coming to alert you that you just won the lottery.
Right.
And it was an exciting dream.
I'll let you know tomorrow if I dream that tonight.
Right.
Go ahead.
But it's the power of suggestion in our
Yes.
minds that helps us move to a different part of that dream, that we can change that. We can have agency over that.
And I love that. We as human beings are so geared and so wired to want options. We want the power of choice.
Boy, that's true.
And I think sometimes we think we have no authority or power over some of the functions in our body. And I'm not saying that we just
will it into existence.
Right. And I know that there are statements like, I manifested that or whatever, but that's really all that is saying, is that we get to choose how we're going to think about something. So is that why the admonition not to let the sun go down on your anger? Is that why, do you think that plays into the fact that obviously sleep is a part of our natural created way of existing, a natural need, right?
Yes, I think that is, and that's an interesting topic to bring up, because I think all too often I've heard young married couples who say, we stayed up until 2 a.m. because we didn't want to let the sun go down on our anger. And I said, wait, I want you to go back and I want you to reread what that says. Don't let the sun go down on what? On your anger. It doesn't mean that you go work that out relationally. It means you work that out internally.
Right. You calm the emotion? Is that what you're saying?
In you.
Okay.
You understand it. You calm it, because oftentimes we orient ourselves to other people rather than first orienting ourselves to us.
That is so good.
And what happens is if I orient myself to someone else, I feel a sense of a loss of control, because you are making me angry. And it's like, no, let's look. What is anger? Anger is an injustice. Has an injustice been done? Or am I disappointed because an expectation wasn't met? And if an expectation wasn't met, then I can sit with disappointment differently than I can sit with an injustice.
Right.
And so I think that you're right, that understanding how to name our emotions and understand what did I truly feel there is important. And especially like what you're saying, before I go to sleep, that it's not something massive that's overwhelming me.
Oh, that is so important for all of us to understand. I think, too, we confuse the fact that our emotions are taking us to a conclusion instead of opening up a pathway for curiosity.
Right.
It's giving us a clue.
Right.
It's not leading us necessarily to a conclusion. The
Spot
conclusion comes later. But, way back at the beginning of our conversation, you said that it unlocks the parts of our brain to figure something out.
Right.
So maybe just calming the anger will allow us to wake up and solve our relational differences
Right.
in a completely different way than what we started out with that made
Right.
us have such an intense emotion.
Yes, and you think about how emotions get heightened when you're tired. You
Yes.
think about the toddler that's throwing a fit and the parent who apologizes and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, they missed their nap."
Oh,
And it's
good
like,
point.
that's legit.
That is legit.
That is absolutely legit. And that's why I tell these young couples that are trying not to let the sun go down on their own anger, is what it says,
Right.
but that it's like, wait, take a rest, take a break, take a beat, whatever you want to take, but take some time and rest, let yourself get a different perspective, and then re-engage with one another.
And it doesn't mean you're ignoring the problem.
Not at
You're
all.
not sweeping it under the rug.
That's right.
It just means that you're giving yourself, your brain, a chance to rest and get that Roomba out.
That's right.
And
Clean up the junk.
That's right. Clean it
That's
all
right.
up. So, thank you so much for sharing. Is there any one thing that you want to say that you haven't had the opportunity to say that you want to leave people with today?
There actually is. And one of the things that I want to make sure we cover is, people ask, is there an ideal bedtime?
Ah,
And the answer to that is kind of.
I love that answer. Is there an ideal budget? Kind of.
Kind of. But the ideal bedtime, one of the things that is really important for us to know is there is this term called a chronotype.
Okay.
And chronotype is when is your natural rhythm to sleep?
Okay.
Meaning, are you an early to bed person? Are you a moderate to middle path bedtime person? Or are you a super late to bed person?
Okay.
If you are an early to bed person, then asking you to stay up past that, now, again, not rigidity, flexibility, but repetitively asking you, that would be like an 8:30, 9 o'clock bedtime. And if that's your natural bodily rhythm, your
Yes.
chronotype, then asking you to stay up until 11 because, every Saturday or, every couple of nights there's this show on that we love to watch and I really want you to stay up. Chances are you're not going to be able to, but it's also, if you do stay up past that natural chronotype bedtime, you're not going to get as great a sleep. And your body's going to naturally wake up super early,
Okay.
right? Because
That's
if you go
fascinating.
to bed early, you naturally wake up early. If you go to bed at a moderate hour, you naturally wake up at a moderate time.
Okay.
If you go to bed super late, you're going to wake up kind of late. And, a lot of times people assign a judgment to that and say, oh, the early bird gets the worm.
I don't really like
I
worms.
don't want the worm. But you think about that and how often we assign value to that.
Yes.
There is no value to whether you go to bed early or go to bed late. It's did you get sleep, and can
Right.
you orient your life to the timings that to your chronotype?
That is phenomenal.
The other part that I would feel remiss if I did not say, parents of teenagers, turn up the volume, please, right now. Parents of teenagers, please hear me. When you are going through puberty and your adolescence, your natural chronotype is kicked to a later phase. That's why teenagers naturally stay up late and naturally want to sleep. Please, parents, let them sleep. And I'm not saying let them sleep till 2 o'clock and let them stay up till 2. I'm not saying that. But please don't kick open the door and tell them that they're lazy if they're sleeping late.
Right.
I want to encourage you. Teenagers of all people need their sleep.
So
And
powerful.
school time is usually super early. And so you're disrupting their sleep 5 days out of the week. And if their chronotype is not, most teenagers, like I said, their chronotype gets kicked to later. And so they're going to struggle to go to bed early. And then you're waking them up early, disrupting the amount of sleep that they're getting. So on the weekends, we don't bank sleep, but at least try to let them catch up on some.
That is so good. And you know, parents, we're not Navy SEALs. Our job is not to kick down doors.
Right.
And even a Navy SEAL goes into a room and is curious before
Right.
they come to a conclusion.
That's right.
And so I think being a curious parent, how can I support you while you're going through this phase of your life rather than you're lazy, is a good technique to use, and you're allowing them to develop a healthier brain,
That's right.
you know, and
A healthier
create
brain, a
connection.
healthier body. You're right about developing connection. And what's interesting is your kid will grow.
Isn't that great?
Physically grow. You look at kids who didn't get good sleep when they were younger, and I wonder, and I don't have evidence for this per se, but I wonder that, you know, people who've been through trauma, people who didn't get good sleep, it really disrupts their growth. When you have other kids who are you know, like we know now, I think about this generation that's coming up now and how much taller they are than their parents. Oftentimes I look around and see so many kids that are outgrowing their parents height-wise. And you think, we now know how to make it darker in the rooms. We know that to make it cooler in rooms, we have that available to us more. We have the ability to create good space for sleep, and how kids are just shooting up height-wise. And I just can't help but think that there's something in there that's really correlated with that.
I agree. And that sounds like sleep nutrition as well as food nutrition.
That is, it combines.
Mental health nutrition. I mean, all of that, like we said, our body is, you know, mind, body, spirit, soul. All of that works together for us to grow and be healthy. Thank you so much for sharing all of this great information with us. I know you've studied hard, and I know that you've delved very deeply into this because it is connected to our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, our physical health. So thank you for that. I so appreciate you taking the time to share that with all of us.
And thank you for being with us today. It's always fun to be with you.
Well, thank you. Right back at you.
If you found value in our discussion and wish to uncover more about the fascinating world of mental wellness, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where Dr. Long will continue to delve into empowering therapies and strategies for mental wellness. Your journey to understanding and embracing mental health is just beginning, and we're excited to have you with us every step of the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and remember to celebrate restored freedom as you uncover it.